Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really plunging into a topic that, well, it gets a lot of people talking, often with some pretty strong opinions: the finances of the British monarchy.
Mm,
For many, the royal family is more than just an institution. It's a powerful symbol, isn't it? National identity, a link to history,
absolutely.
centuries of it.
But what does upholding all that tradition actually cost? That's the big question.
It really is.
So our goal today is to dig beyond those headline figures and explore the actual financial burden and, the claimed benefits of the British monarchy.
Right.
We're going to try and unpack the full breakdown of their costs, trace how the funding has evolved over the centuries, look into some of the financial controversies and scandals.
And there have been a few.
Definitely. And also gauge what the public truly thinks. Is it value for money for the UK taxpayer?
And that's exactly what we'll aim for, an objective look. This deep dive, it's about presenting all sides of the financial story, so you, the listener, can draw your own conclusions.
Right. We've sifted through the sources, trying to understand not just the numbers themselves, but what they really mean for the taxpayer and for the monarchy's future, too.
Okay, so let's start with what most people hear, the common perception.
Mm-hmm.
The official figure, it's based on the sovereign grant, and it's often quoted as, about £1.29 per person per year?
That's the one. Yeah, £1.29 per UK citizen.
Which sounds incredibly affordable on the surface, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. But groups like Republic, the anti-monarchy campaign group, they paint a very different picture indeed.
How so?
Well, they argued the true annual cost is significantly higher, much higher. Once you factor everything in, they estimate it exceeds $500 million a year.
Wow, $500 million.
Yeah, which works out roughly about £7 to £8 per person in the UK.
So that's 5 to 7 times higher than the official figure everyone hears?
Exactly. It's a huge difference.
Okay, that is a stark contrast. So if the sovereign grant is only a small part of that, what are these other costs? These hidden costs, where does that $500 million figure actually come from?
Right, it's a mix of things. First, you've got the sovereign grant itself. In 2023-24, it was around $86 million.
Okay.
That covers the core stuff, royal travel, salaries for staff, upkeep for the official palaces like Buckingham Palace.
And that comes from the taxpayer?
Yes, via the Treasury. It's calculated as a percentage of the Crown Estate's profits. Currently, there's also a big chunk, over £34 million, earmarked for the big Buckingham Palace refurbishment. That's a 10-year project.
Right. I remember hearing about that.
And it's interesting, King Charles actually acted recently to reduce the percentage the grant takes from those profits. It was 25%. Now it's dropping to 12%.
Why was that?
Well, the Crown Estate profits shot up, mainly from offshore wind farm deals. If they'd kept it at 25%, the grant would have ballooned. So lowering it to 12% was seen as a way to avoid, a massive windfall and probably public backlash, sort of preemptive cost consciousness, perhaps.
I see. Okay, so that's the sovereign grant. But $86 million is still a long way from $500 million. What else is there?
Right, this is where the really big hidden costs come in, primarily. Security and policing. This is a colossal amount. Estimates range from $100 million to maybe $150 million annually. And the key thing is, it's never publicly itemized.
Why not?
Security reasons, essentially. But it covers round-the-clock protection by specialist police, military guards, all funded through the Home Office and the Ministry of Defense budgets, not the sovereign grant.
Got it. So it's taxpayer money, just not directly from the grant.
Exactly. And just to give you an idea of the scale, think about the King's coronation last year, 2023. Just the policing and security for that single event cost taxpayers a reported $72 million.
$72 million. Just for security for one event.
Just for security. Puts the annual $150 million estimate into perspective, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Okay.
So grant, security, what else adds up?
Then you have the income from the two big hereditary estates, the Duchy of Cornwall and the Duchy of Lancaster.
Right, these often come up.
The Duchy of Cornwall, that traditionally finances the Prince of Wales, generates around £22 million a year.
Right.
And the Duchy of Lancaster, that provides the monarch's private income, known as the Privy Purse, brings in about $20 million annually.
And these are treated as private incomes?
Largely, yes, even though their history is deeply entwined with the Crown as an institution. It's a point of contention, as you can imagine.
I bet. What else contributes?
Well, you've also got costs borne by local authorities and other government departments. Think about royal visits around the country.
Security for those, road closures.
Precisely. Local security, traffic management, sometimes military ceremonial units. That adds up to over 30 million annually across the country. And crucially, local councils and police forces aren't typically reimbursed by the palace for these costs.
So local taxpayers are picking up that tab directly.
Effectively, yes. And finally, there are the tax breaks and exemptions. These are hard to put an exact figure on, but they're significant.
The big one being inheritance tax.
That's the most famous one. The monarch's estate is exempt from inheritance tax when it passes from sovereign to sovereign.
And we saw that with King Charles inheriting from Queen Elizabeth.
We did. Her fortune was estimated at somewhere between 650 750 million. Passing that on entirely tax-free likely saved King Charles somewhere in the region of 200 to 300 million, given the standard 40% inheritance tax rate.
Okay, so if you add all that up, the sovereign grant, the massive security bill, the duchy incomes, the local council costs, the tax breaks, you can see how you get to that 500, 600 million figure pretty quickly.
Exactly. It's well over £500 million a year, according to those calculations.
Which, as you say, profoundly challenges that £1.29 per person idea.
It absolutely does. And this really gets to the heart of the debate. You have Republican groups saying this is a scandalous misuse of public funds for an institution they see as outdated.
And the palace's response.
The counter-argument is that the monarchy provides significant good value in other ways. Less tangible things, perhaps, like national unity, preserving heritage, diplomatic soft power, attracting tourism.
Intangibles versus very tangible costs.
Precisely, which raises that really difficult question. How do you actually weigh those things against each other? How do you put a price on national unity, for example?
It's tricky. Maybe looking at the history of how we got here can help.
Yeah.
How has royal funding changed over time? Because it wasn't always a sovereign grant, was it?
Not at all. Understanding the past really does shed light on today's controversies. The absolute pivotal moment was back in 1760.
George III.
That's the one. King George III made a landmark deal with the government. He agreed to surrender the hereditary revenues from the crown lands, which we now call the crown estate, to Parliament.
In exchange for what?
In return for a fixed annual payment from Parliament to cover his official duties. This was called the civil list.
Okay, so that's the big shift. The crown estate profits go to the treasury.
For public benefit, yes. And Parliament takes on the job of funding the monarchy's official role. And it's crucial to remember the crown estate isn't the monarch's private property. It's owned by the monarch in right of the crown, essentially in trust for the nation.
So that basic structure, the state owns the assets but pays the monarch, has been there since 1760.
The principle, yes, though the details have constantly evolved. Throughout the 1800s, Parliament had to approve a new civil list for each new monarch, and those debates often got quite heated, scrutinizing royal spending.
I can imagine.
Interestingly, by the early 20th century, something shifted. The profits from the crown estate started to exceed what the government was paying out in the civil list, sometimes by quite a lot.
So for a while, the taxpayer was actually making a profit from the arrangement.
For a decent period, yes. The 1760 deal looked pretty good for the Treasury then.
What happened next? Did that continue?
Well, things changed. We had the abdication in 1936, then World War II. King George VI actually waived or reduced some payments during the war years, showing some austerity. Then, when Queen Elizabeth II came to the throne in 1952, her civil list was set at £475,000 a year, about £13 million in today's money.
Seems like a lot, but maybe not for running the monarchy.
Exactly. And inflation eroded it pretty quickly. By 1972, they needed the Civil List Act to increase it significantly to nearly £1 million, £980,000. That's when she got that tabloid nickname, the £1 Million Monarch.
Okay.
But what's fascinating, even back then, is how many costs were already being met outside the civil list. Things like the Royal Yacht Britannia, the Queen's Flight. Those were funded quietly by government departments like the Ministry of Defense. So these hidden costs, they're not really a new thing at all.
That's a really interesting point. It seems the official figure has often masked the true total cost.
It often has. Which brings us to that really crucial period, the early 90s. You mentioned the Annus Horribilis of 1992-1993.
Is that horrible year, Windsor Castle fire?
Exactly. There was huge public anger. First, over the question of who should pay for the Windsor Castle fire repairs, initial suggestions it should be the taxpayer went down terribly.
I remember the backlash.
And second, growing criticism about the Queen not paying income tax on her private income. It all came to a head.
So what changed?
Several things. In a major move, the Queen voluntarily agreed to start paying income tax on her personal income and her Duchy of Lancaster income from 1993 onwards.
Okay, that was significant.
It was. Also, most other royals were removed from the direct public payroll. The civil list was basically reduced to just funding the Queen and Prince Philip. And Buckingham Palace was open for public tours for the first time, specifically to raise money to help pay for the Windsor repairs.
Right. But you mentioned something else key happened then regarding tax.
Yes, absolutely crucial detail. While the Queen agreed to pay income tax, the government at the same time formally codified that exemption for inheritance tax on assets passing from sovereign to sovereign.
Ah, so they gave with one hand and sort of solidified a benefit with the other.
You could certainly see it that way. The official reason given was to preserve the independence of the monarchy's assets, to ensure they weren't depleted over generations. But it enshrined that very significant tax advantage we talked about earlier.
Okay, so after those 90s reforms, did things settle down financially?
For a bit. The civil list was basically frozen at £7.9 million through the 2000s. In fact, the palace built up quite a surplus because of that.
And then came the sovereign grant.
Then came the big change in 2012 with the Sovereign Grant Act 2011. This abolished the old civil list and the various grants and aid, consolidating all the direct public funding into that single sovereign grant.
And linked it to the Crown Estate profits.
Exactly. Initially set at 15% of the Crown Estate's net profits from 2 years prior. A key aim was greater transparency. The grant comes with annual reports audited by the National Audit Office, subject to parliamentary scrutiny. So it marked a definite shift towards more modern financial accountability.
A big structural change, moving from a fixed pot of money to a formula based on asset performance.
A massive shift. Then, as we mentioned, that percentage was temporarily hiked to 25% in 2017, specifically to fund the decade-long Buckingham Palace refurbishment project.
The $369 million one.
That's the one. And then most recently, that adjustment back down to 12% from 2024-25 onwards, agreed by King Charles and the Treasury, because of that offshore wind farm boom making Crown Estate profits surge.
To avoid the grant getting excessively large.
Precisely. It was projected to jump well over $130 million otherwise, which probably wouldn't have looked good, so they capped it effectively by lowering the percentage.
So looking back at this evolution, from a fixed, often debated civil list to this formula-driven grant linked to national assets, has it worked? Has it quieted the criticism?
Well, it's certainly more transparent in many ways. The annual reports are detailed, but the core debate hasn't gone away. While that 1760 deal initially benefited tax milters, critics now point out that linking the grant to Crown Estate profits means the monarchy directly benefits when these national assets perform well. They have a vested interest, you might say.
Right. And even with these reforms, the financial controversies, they haven't exactly disappeared, have they? New issues seem to keep cropping up.
No, they haven't vanished. Despite the move to the sovereign grant and greater transparency, the royal household has still faced repeated accusations, sometimes about misuse of funds, sometimes about privilege, sometimes about ethical judgment. It suggests the controversies are perhaps deeper than just the funding mechanism.
What sort of things are we talking about more recently?
Well, one type relates to secrecy and influence. For instance, it only came out in 2021 through unearthed documents that back in 1973, Queen Elizabeth II's lawyers had secretly lobbied the government.
Lobbied for what?
To change a proposed law on corporate transparency. They used a mechanism called Queen's Consent, where the monarch has to approve bills affecting their private interests to basically insert a clause exempting heads of state from having to disclose their private shareholdings.
So she could keep her private wealth hidden.
Effectively, yes. It created a state-backed shell company to hold her investments privately. When this came out decades later, it led to accusations of an abuse of power, using a procedural tool for personal financial privacy.
So that raises questions about influence. And the tax issues didn't entirely go away after 1993 either.
No, because while the Queen started paying income tax, that big inheritance tax exemption remained firmly in place.
The sovereign-to-sovereign one.
Exactly. So when the Queen Mother died in 2002, her estate, estimated around $70 million, passed to the Queen entirely tax-free. That saved what? Maybe $28 million in tax?
Right.
And then, as we've discussed, the huge one, King Charles, inheriting the estimated $750 million Duchy of Lancaster and other assets from Queen Elizabeth II, saving potentially $300 million in tax. It constantly raises that question, why does this one individual, the monarch, get this unique exemption that no one else does?
That's a persistent question. What about other types of financial scandals, things involving other royals
Yes, there have been several high-profile ones. The Cash for Honors scandal resurfaced in 2021, though similar allegations had emerged back in 2003.
This involved Prince Charles's foundation.
Yes, specifically Michael Fawcett, who was then CEO of the Princess Foundation. Allegations emerged that he had helped coordinate efforts to secure an honor, a CBE, and potentially support for UK citizenship for a Saudi billionaire who had made large donations to the foundation.
What happened with that?
Well, Fawcett resigned. There was a police investigation, which eventually closed with no charges being brought. But the Charity Commission, the regulator, launched its own investigation into the foundation's governance and fundraising practices, which is ongoing. It raised serious concerns about oversight and potential cronyism within the future king's charitable empire.
And then there's Prince Andrew, of course. His financial dealings have caused huge controversy.
Immense controversy. Two main aspects stand out. First, back in 2007, the sale of his former home, Sunninghill Park.
Right, the one that looked a bit like a supermarket.
Yes, that one. He sold for £15 million to the family of a Kazakh oligarch, which was £3 million over the asking price, and after it had sat on the market for years. It raised eyebrows, with suggestions it looked like a payoff, perhaps linked to Andrew allegedly helping the buyer's family with business deals, though that was denied.
And the second aspect.
Much more seriously, his association with Jeffrey Epstein, which led to the civil sexual assault lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre in the U.S.
Which he settled out of court.
He did, for a reported £12 million, crucially without any admission of liability. The palace stated no public funds were used for the settlement. However, reports widely suggested that Queen Elizabeth II contributed significantly, perhaps £2 million, from her private Duchy of Lancaster income, with the rest potentially coming from the sale of assets or other private royal funds.
And the reaction to that was?
Huge public outrage. Not just about the nature of the allegations Andrew faced, but the fact that money derived ultimately from royal status, even if technically private royal funds, was used to settle such a case. It led to calls for him to be stripped of titles and removed entirely from public life.
It really damaged the family's reputation. Were there other leaks or revelations?
Yes, the Paradise Papers leak in 2017 also touched the royals. It revealed that the Queen's private estate, the Duchy of Lancaster, had invested about $10 million in offshore funds in places like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda.
Which isn't illegal,
But it raised questions. Some investments were in controversial companies, like Bright House, a rent-to-own firm heavily criticized for its treatment of vulnerable customers. It also showed Prince Charles's Duchy of Cornwall had invested in a Bermuda-based sustainable forestry company run by a friend, raising potential conflict of interest concerns given his very public environmental campaigning.
So optics again. Even if legal, it didn't look great.
Exactly. It chipped away at that image of being above grubby finance or politics. Then there was another lobbying instance revealed in 2021. The Queen's lawyers successfully lobbied the Scottish government to exempt her private Balmoral estate lands from a new green energy law, the Heat Networks Bill. She became the only landowner in Scotland exempt from requirements to facilitate green heating pipelines, again, using the Queen's consent process.
More special treatment.
That was the accusation. And more recently, in 2022, those rather startling reports emerged about Prince Charles personally accepting large sums of cash, reportedly $3 million in total, in bags, even a suitcase from a Qatari sheikh between 2011 and 2015.
Cash in bags.
Cash in bags. His office quickly stated the money was immediately passed to one of his charities and all correct processes were followed, and it wasn't illegal. But the optics, accepting millions in cash personally, even for charity, it raised serious questions about judgment and propriety for the future head of state.
It sounds pretty bad, even if technically above board.
It does. And finally, there are the ongoing controversies about the duchies themselves, Cornwall and Lancaster.
We mentioned their income earlier. What's the controversy?
It's about their status and their tax advantages. Royals claim they are private estates. Critics, like Republic, argue forcefully that historically they are crown, i.e. state property, not private family holdings.
And the issue is how the money's used.
Partly. And the fact they enjoy unique tax breaks. The Duchy of Cornwall, for example, pays no corporation tax on its profits. They also collect something called bona vacantia in their respective areas, basically, the assets of people who die without a will or heirs. Critics see the duchies operating with state-like privileges, but private accountability as a form of institutional corruption. They argue the income should go to the treasury, like the Crown estates.
So it seems despite reforms like the sovereign grant, these issues Secrecy, special privileges, questionable judgments, the status of the duchies, they keep bubbling up.
They really do.
Yeah.
And each episode, even if the palace responds explaining voluntary measures or legality, it tends to chip away at the monarchy's mystique and reinforces questions about whether there's enough accountability for an institution funded, directly and indirectly, by so much public money and enjoying so many unique privileges.
Which leads us perfectly to public opinion. With all these costs we've outlined and these recurring controversies, how do the British people actually feel about paying for the monarchy today? Is that 7-day-a-year figure, if accurate, something people accept?
It's a really interesting and definitely shifting picture. Looking at the polls, overall, a majority of Britons do still express support for keeping the monarchy as an institution.
Okay.
And perhaps surprisingly to some, a majority also tend to say it represents good value for money. A YouGov poll from April 2023, around the time of the coronation, found 54% thought it was good value versus 31% who said bad value.
So it's still positive overall.
On the surface, yes. And another poll around the same time found 58% saying the institution is generally good for Britain. Supporters often point to the benefits we mentioned: tourism, charity work, diplomacy, national identity.
But you said the picture is shifting.
It is, because while those figures show majority support, that support is definitely shrinking. That 58% saying it's good for Britain, that's down significantly from 73% just a decade ago.
That's quite a drop.
It is. And beneath the headline support, there's clear skepticism about the funding aspect. Take the King's coronation funding, for example. That same April 2023 YouGov poll found 51% of Britons said, no, the government should not fund the coronation from taxpayer money.
Half the country against funding the biggest royal event.
Just over half, yes. That's a very pointed statement about public money for ceremonial events, even if they support the institution overall.
Interesting distinction.
And there's more evidence people want change on the cost front. A Lord Ashcroft poll in May 2023, just after the coronation, found that a really significant 66% of the UK public agreed the royal family should be scaled down and its costs significantly reduced.
Two-thirds want it smaller and cheaper.
Yes. And what's particularly telling about that figure is that it included a majority, 58% of people who actually support keeping the monarchy.
So even monarchists want a leaner operation.
Exactly. It shows a very broad consensus right across the spectrum for reducing the scale and cost of the royal family. People might like the idea of a monarchy, but perhaps not such an extensive, expensive version.
And does this feeling vary across the UK? Are there demographic splits?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets really fascinating, particularly when thinking of the future. The biggest split is generational.
Younger people are less keen.
Much less keen. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, only about a third think the monarchy is good value for money. And significantly, this age group actually leans Republican now. Polls show around 34% of them would prefer an elected head of state versus only about 28% wanting to keep the monarchy.
That's a major shift.
It really is. It suggests that traditional deference or automatic support isn't there among younger generations. They seem to be weighing the costs and benefits differently. There's also a regional split, particularly with Scotland.
Less support there, too.
Yes, support for keeping the monarchy is much narrower in Scotland compared to England or Wales. Polls there often show something like 46% wanting to keep it versus 32% wanting to abolish it. Still a lead for keeping it, but a much smaller margin, reflecting perhaps different national sentiments or political alignments.
And what are the impact of the change in monarch, from Queen Elizabeth to King Charles?
Well, there was definitely a bump in support for the monarchy immediately after Queen Elizabeth II passed away in 2022, a sort of rally-around effect.
But that didn't last.
It appears to have been temporary. As King Charles III's reign settles in, the public focus seems to be shifting back to those core issues: cost, transparency, relevance. People are watching closely to see if his apparent signals towards a slimmed-down modern monarchy actually translate into reality.
Things like having fewer working royals,
Yeah.
the move to reduce the sovereign grant percentage, maybe pushing Andrew out of Royal Lodge.
Exactly. Those actions and having a less extravagant coronation than his mother's, they do seem designed to project an image of cost consciousness. The question is whether it'll be enough to satisfy public demand for real change and value for money.
So, pulling all this together, what does it mean for the future? For the monarchy's value proposition, as it were, in the eyes of the public?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that while a majority in Britain, for now, still tolerates or even endorses the monarchy's public cost, that majority is clearly shrinking. And crucially, it seems to be becoming more conditional.
Conditional on what?
conditional on seeing less cost, more transparency, and arguably fewer scandals. That old narrative, the bargain monarchy, at just over £1 per person, has been pretty effectively challenged by the evidence suggesting the true cost is many times higher.
Right. So for you, the listener, it really boils down to that question the critics keep asking. If the monarchy actually costs us closer to £7 or £8 a year each, is it worth it? What are we getting for that money?
That is the fundamental question, isn't it? And you could argue the monarchy's long-term survival might depend less on just appealing to tradition and more on its ability to genuinely adapt to modern expectations.
Adapt how?
By demonstrably scaling back its costs, by embracing much greater financial transparency, maybe even over the duchies, and by consistently proving its value in ways that resonate today. Accountability and value for money are huge public concerns now.
And if they can't, if King Charles and his successors can't really tighten the spending, avoid the controversies.
Then public sentiment might continue to shift. It could tip further towards those who feel that £500 million, or whatever the true figure is, could simply be better spent elsewhere on public services. But hopefully now, you, the listener, have a clearer picture of the facts and the arguments to weigh that very question for yourself.
Thanks for watching the video.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If there's a specific topic you'd like us to cover next time, do let us know.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And if you found this one helpful, make sure to share it with others too.
See you in the next video.